Good evening and a very warm welcome to our series of conversations jointly organized by the Goethe-Institut Max Müller-Barwan Kolkata and Seagull Books. My name is Astrid Weger. I'm the director of Goethe-Institut Max Müller-Barwan Kolkata. How can you hear what I'm saying? You're so far away is a series of conversations on reading and writing in Germany between writers and intellectuals addressing topical issues in literature, philosophy, politics, and society. We have had many interesting conversations last year, and we are thrilled and very happy to continue in 2022. Today is the first conversation this year, and I'm pleased and honored to welcome and introduce our guests of today, Gunther Geltinger and Sandip Roy. Gunther Geltinger was born in 1974 in Erlenbach and currently lives in Cologne. He studied scriptwriting and drama at the University of Music and Performing Arts in Vienna and at the Academy of Media Arts in Cologne. His critically acclaimed debut, Mensch Engel, was published in 2008, followed by his second novel, Moor, in 2013, which was published in English by Seagull Books in 2017 in a translation by Alexander Both. Benzin, Geltinger's third novel, was published in 2019. A reading of excerpts from the book Moor by Gunther Geltinger is performed in German by the author himself and in English by writer, filmmaker, and photographer Ruchir Joshi. And you will find both readings on our website, so have a look. Sandip Roy, who will lead through the conversation, is familiar to those who joined us last year. He's a writer, radio host, and columnist in Kolkata. His work has been published in the New York Times, San Francisco Chronicle, the Times of India, Firstpost, and other publications. His audio dispatch from Kolkata airs weekly on public radio in San Francisco. He's a columnist for Mint Lounge and hosts the Sandip Roy Show on Audio Express. His award-winning first novel is Don't Let Him Know. Thanks a lot for both of you joining us today in this first session in 2022. I very much look forward to your conversation, and I think all those who joined us on the screen do too. A warm thanks goes to our partner Seagull Books, namely Naveen Kishore and his team. Thanks also to my colleagues from the Goethe-Institut, Shomishta Sarkar and Pata Chattopadhyay. And thank you all who joined us. I wish you and all of us a very inspiring evening, and I give now over to Sandip Roy and Gunther Geltinger. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Gunther Geltinger, welcome to the program. And well, I think we can still say Happy New Year because it's still January.
And I think, yes. Happy New Year to Kolkata and good evening to Kolkata from Cologne in Germany. Hello.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you, everybody.
No, before we get to the Moor, I always want to check in with the writers we've been talking to in these series and ask how this pandemic and lockdown and all of this has been for you as a writer. What has been your experience?
That will fill a whole evening talking about the pandemic and the literary impact of the pandemic to a writer, how he lives and how he writes. Well, in fact, there are two sorts of impact. There's the impact of my life as a writer, which in the beginning was very difficult because I had no readings. I was kind of thrown out of the normal way how you live your daily life as a writer. I was always staring at the news. I was overwhelmed by this pandemic. And the second impact was what's happening with society. And because as a writer, you have always to observe society, you have to regard society changings. I focused my interest on the changes of society, and that was quite interesting to watch because I think all societies worldwide are changing at the moment, especially the German society is changing in a way that frightens me in some parts. And I couldn't refuse that this changes, this gap, which now you can see in the German society, has an impact on my writing. It influenced the theme of my fourth novel. I'm not writing about the pandemic. I'm not writing about Corona, but it changed my focus. And the pandemic will have a role in my fourth novel, but not as the virus. Yeah, I think.
Oh, that's interesting because, I remember talking to another writer, actually, Jan Martel, wrote Life of Pi. And this is early in the pandemic. And we were talking about whether there would be a great pandemic novel, like there are great World War II novels and things like that. And Martel said, no, I think it's too close. It's something we've all experienced so much that I don't know that we would want to live through the pandemic again in a novel. But he could see that that maybe the pandemic as a metaphor, the pandemic as a symbol of how people have changed, that may appear in literature. And it seems like you're saying something like that as well.
I think the big ruptures of history, we only can judge from the retrospective. So we can look back. We need a distance from a few years, but the pandemic is not over. It's a process, and we are part of the process. And a writer is a part of the processes of changing. So we will write close to the pandemic, like watching it under a microscope. And now we can look back to the Second World War with a distance from 50 years. To the pandemic, it's just behind us, or just in the middle.
Right.
It's just beside us. Yeah.
Yeah, you can feel it breath on your neck.
It will have an impact. So yeah. But I'm looking forward to read the novels of my colleagues and look, this is a metaphor of the pandemic. Oh, there's a virus, or there's something like a sickness, or maybe it has an impact to everyone who is writing in a way.
Yeah, and in that sense, I think it will be different. Like, I think like when the AIDS pandemic was into the world, there was a lot of books, films that dealt with HIV/AIDS that came out. Yeah. But I think, in a sense, AIDS was still not felt as universally as Corona is. It was still regarded as affecting particular groups of people. So there was, in a way, there was a sense of need to report on AIDS for a larger world, which is different from Corona, because we are sort of all experiencing it in some form.
It is different, and the main difference is Corona touches everybody of us, and HIV, AIDS, for many years it was a taboo. You didn't talk about it. It was a sickness of gays, and in the 90s there were nearly no gay literature, so it came up later. Now you can write about HIV, but in the 80s or 90s, to write about HIV, it's a double taboo. It's writing about homosexuality and writing about AIDS. So
yeah, I mean, yes, exactly. The stigma that was associated with it is not there in Corona in the same way. Let's talk about Moor. I live in Kolkata, nowhere near a Moor, but I have been fascinated because of English books that I'd read, like Hound of the Baskervilles and Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights, because the Moors always seemed so mysterious and places of great mystery. Were you interested in the Moor before you started writing this book?
Not at all. It's a very good question. Well, for me, the Moor, as for many other people, was a cliche. it was that what you are describing. It's mystic, it's dark, and it's always, yeah, you see them more in films, you see them more in old novels or in fairy tales. Actually, I grew up in a valley at the banks of a river. There are no moors, but I was looking for a landscape which is very special for my novel. And in the beginning of the novel, in the beginning of the writing process, there was not the moor. There was a picture of a pond, of a dark pond, and a woman naked swimming in it. I think it's a picture of my childhood. I know that the pond, not the woman swimming in it, but the pond. It's the pond it's part of the valley, and I took this picture and tried to find a scenery which is suitable. And I found the Moor, and I began to write about the Moor, and I had, well, I thought, okay, you only know cliches about the Moor. And then I started to do the research in the real Moor. And I live in Cologne. The next Moor landscape is about 100 km from the city at the border to the Netherlands. And there I started my biological and geological research. And then I slowly get to know the Moor, which is very special.
Was it as interesting and mysterious as you remember reading about it?
Not at all, not at all. The Moor is a very empty landscape. It's calm. It's totally unspectacular. Some bushes, some trees, but the trees are mostly dead. Nearly no animals. Little water. I thought, oh, there's mud everywhere. No, there's no mud. It's dry. It's dry with some ponds, deep ponds, dark ponds, and it depends on the rain if there's much or less water. So it was a total different landscape, as I had the image, for example, from a poem which I love, Der Knabe im Moor von Annette von Droste-Hülshoff. That's a very famous poem, which is placed in the Moor from the 19th century. And but it was totally different. So I had to find my Moor, and well, I hope I found it.
But I mean, there is obviously in the Moor itself has a voice, and the Moor itself, because these are these coal peat bogs, you know, there is a story of a child whose body is found preserved from many centuries, preserved in this peat. So it has all that history and sort of an ominous quality to it as well. But what interested you about the Moor as a literary device?
That's a very important question, because the choice of the narrative perspective was one of the most important challenges of the novel. When I started to write the first version, I chose the third person. So the point of view was the third person. I think you call it selected narrator. That means we had an insight into the protagonist, but we are outside him. It's not he's not saying I or me. But in a way, I felt imprisoned in that point of view. Why imprisoned? Because that point of view obliged me in a way to tell the story, let's say, in a psychological way. I felt obliged to classify the things which happen between the mother and the child But that was not the story I wanted to tell. It was not my intention to judge morally. I wanted to I wanted to tell the story of the ruin, of the downfall of a childhood. So I went into the Moor. And I found this a landscape which was not that what I expected. And for Dion, the Moor is a homeland.
Dion is the boy.
Yeah, he grew up in the Moor, or at the border of a Moor, and the Moor is a very close partner to him. He's a kind of a childish scientist. He knows everything about the Moor. He collects dragonflies, for example. So the Moor is closer to him than the mother. It's a kind of best friend. And I thought, okay, why not make speak the best friend? Why not make speak the Moor? Biologically seen, the Moor is a kind of archive. You already mentioned it. It's made out of peat. And the peat is acid. So things which get into the peat can't rot, and they are preserved. So it's a kind of museum, a kind of archive. There are centuries in it, preserved, conserved. So if a Moor is the narrator, it speaks out of the past, out of the centuries. Why not let the Moor tell the boy his own story, because the boy is a stutterer and can't speak, and he needs somebody who speaks for him. And with this idea, I went back home. I looked at the 100 pages I wrote into the rubbish, starting new.
Wow.
So,
that's always, I mean, I guess that's an exciting and scary moment as well.
there is this conserved boy for centuries in the peat. They will find it, but it's a part of the myth. Yeah, it's a part of the myth of the Moor. Yeah.
But that's also interesting because, in a way, the Moor is a landscape, and in the way the story is told of both the mother and the son, you are also very carefully drawing the landscape of their souls. So in a way, when I read the book, I feel like there are three landscapes that are being drawn there for the reader's perspective.
Thank you for that thought, because in fact there are more landscape than only the Moor. There, I think every soul has its own landscape, and nature for me is more than only in my novels is more than only a setting. You know, nature is always a kind of dialogue partner. It's a kind of person opposite. And the landscape is more than a soulscape. A landscape is mute, but in the same time, it's full of speech. It's a landscape is not speechless. It just has another language. Yeah. So all the sceneries in my books are mute, but not speechless. They're very close to the physical and psychological shape of the souls of my characters. And where the characters get mute, where they are maybe unable to express their emotions or their secrets, nature comes into the foreground. So nature is always more than only a landscape. Maybe there's a kind of fateful connection between my protagonists and between nature, because they are always bound in a very difficult and very fateful way. Yeah.
What has been your own relationship with nature?
Good question. I thought you will ask me that this questions, but it's important because I think nature is the beginning and the center of my writing. My long before I began to write about humans, I wrote about nature. My first stories were nearly deserted. There was nature, there were animals, but no humans. Maybe this is how I felt as a child. Maybe how I sensed my surrounding. So it was full of people because I grew up in a big family. Yeah.
Mm.
So the first story I can remember was about a little waterfall in the forest of my homeland. And 40 years later, the waterfall came back to me. The showdown of my last novel, Benzin, is placed at the Victoria Falls. So the little waterfall of my childhood and the big waterfall in my novel. And I think I had always a very close relationship to nature, and I was a stutterer. So as Dion, as the character of my novel Moor, I didn't like to speak to people because I was a stutterer. It was always exhausting and frustrating to talk to people, and that gave me maybe I was closer to nature. That doesn't mean that I spoke to a nature, but I listened to nature, and the nature was mute but not speechless, and I was mute but not speechless. So
like Dion, did you also keep trying to find words with H? Because Dion stumbles over words with C and K. So he keeps trying in his presentations to fill it with words with H, which are easier for him.
Actually, the H is a very difficult, and it's mean. It's a mean. It's mean because you have it's like a consonant. H is It's not like in the Moor. I tried to escape with M. M is soft, soft, or with N, but it's similar. Well, but the H always was my enemy.
H was your enemy. One of the things while I was reading, and like this boy Dion, as we say, he has a bad stutter, so he often talks in his head. But it makes you think that while reading the book, that speechlessness, or what we think of as speechlessness, can actually be so much more powerful than speech, because we can read a lot more into speechlessness as opposed to speech, because when someone says something, that's all you have to deal with. But the speechlessness, whether it is of the Moor, it actually has a lot more power.
Well, the Moor is the opposite of Dion, because it's talking all the time. It's talking and talking and talking, much words, many words, pictures. It's like a flood of words. It's like a flood of pictures. So if I would have chosen the perspective of Dion with his very small vocabulary, which he can articulate, I had to find a similar speech, a similar language for the novel. But now the Moor is talking, the Moor is the narrator, and the Moor can use every language, all kind of words, old, ancient words from behind, from the past, new words. It can talk like the people in the village. It can talk like the people in Hamburg, where the mother goes to work. the Moor is free. It's a landscape. It also can talk like the sea, because before a landscape gets a Moor, it was covered by water. And the landscape I describe in the Moor, in the northern part of Germany, near the city Bremen, was covered by the sea. More than centuries ago. Yeah. So the Moor can have every language, the language of mountains, of the sea, as well as the language of the Moor. And you never should trust this narrator, because
that's what I was coming to, because in a way, you say the Moor is this archive of memory, but over and over again in the book, just as you feel like you've made some sense of who the characters are, something changes and you realize that memory is very unreliable.
Yeah. And that was the main aspect why I chose the Moor. Dion shouldn't trust him as a narrator, because he can't trust his own memories. And so if you see the Moor as a symbol or a picture, a metaphor for the memory of the boy, you get stuck in it, and maybe you get drowned. Yeah. So if the Moor characterize in front of the boy her mother, it's a different way of characterization as he himself characterizes her. So me as a writer felt very free. I felt free to characterize her in a way to confrontate the boy with an image of the mother which maybe isn't true, but now he has to deal with this image, and me as a writer and you as a reader have to deal. Oh, is this really the mother, or maybe she is totally different? But you can't look into the head of the boy, because you look at the Moor. Yeah.
Right. So yeah, exactly. So you can't actually, you think you're looking into the heads of these characters, but you're not, because you are actually, your viewpoint is being shaped by the Moor and what it is choosing to tell you. And I don't want to give too much away for people who have not read the book about what they discover, but I'll say just this much, that in this at one point you realize that this boy Dion, when he's grown up, he writes a novel where the mother recognizes herself, but also thinks he has sort of stabbed her in the back, that writing about family can be an act of betrayal. And as a writer, have you faced that dilemma? Family is often the easiest place for us to steal things from, but that's also the most dangerous.
The family is a similar archive like the Moor. You can explore it, and there's so many things to find, traumas and taboos, and yes, I explored it in a way. And I felt it in a way because I'm not an autobiographical writer, but I deal with autobiographical material. And it's autofictional, and Moor is not my childhood, but there are elements of my childhood. And my first novel, Mensch Engel, was more my youth and my childhood. And well, I had to describe my family and I had to deal with that. How to describe my family, how to describe my homeland, how to describe a landscape, a setting, a place where actually I wasn't happy. So you have to find a way not to lie to yourself and not to, how should you call it, not to betray the people you love, your family. Yeah. So.
But is that easy? I mean, in the end, as you say, as a writer, you may not be creating a character based on your own family's members, but you take elements from their lives to pass on to those characters, little things. And so does that make it, I mean, is that tricky to explain to your family that even though these elements are similar to your life, that's not you? Even though this boy Dion is stuttering, that is not me.
Now they're used to it.
So they don't talk around you. So when you have a family
we don't
dinner,
talk about that anymore.
Nobody opens their mouth. Everyone's just like,
I'm writing my 4th novel. So okay, am I a protagonist? No. Well, I think in my first novel I did some mistakes. I'm getting better.
Like what kind of mistakes did you do?
Well, but a family, for a writer, it's an invitation to write about your family, because a family is like the microcosm of the society we live in. And because I'm interested in to look at the blind spots of society life, I often choose families as a protagonist or as a topic. And so when I find a social topic that attracts my attention, for example, like in Moor, the topic of destructive or abusive love, I try to concentrate this general and abstract topic into a specific relationship between my characters, who often are family members. And so when I start writing, I don't know anything about their secrets. If I knew the secrets, it's not interesting to write about secrets. So my intention is not to unfold the secrets by following a detective plan. Yeah. And so I also invent secrets in my own family, which doesn't exist, but maybe they are similar, but they are not the same. So, and now my family is used to it, that I invent themselves in every novel, or in some parts of a novel. But I try to find a very abstract dimension, so that it could be my family, but it's not one-to-one the character, the mother, the father, or the sister. Yeah.
You know, a writer once gave me this piece of advice, and he said, like, if you ever put, and he was talking in an Indian context, he said, if you ever put anybody who might resemble an aunt or somebody of your own into a novel, the first thing you do is, when you introduce the character, always say that she was dressed in the most beautiful sari. And then as soon as you've said that, then they forgive everything else the character does.
That's a very good information. I will keep it in my mind.
So you just dress them well. I mean, like the initial thing, make sure they dress very nicely. Then people don't care.
Main thing is that the mother or the sister are beautiful. Then
yes,
You can do
everything else, then they can do really horrible things, but it doesn't matter because ultimately we are very vain. But what interested you, Gunther, in looking at this story around this topic of abusive love in this relationship between a mother and a son?
Well, I told you in the first glance, I had this picture in my mind of the pond and the mother swimming in it naked and the son sitting on a rock watching her. And I asked myself, oh, why should I look at this picture? Who is showing me this picture? This picture, I felt it like it was a secret to explore, but it also was a kind of task or kind of obligation. And I asked myself, okay, is it a topic? Should I write about mothers and sons? And well, if you watch literary history, there are many stories about fathers and sons. Also, there are stories about fathers and daughters, but there are not so many stories about dangerous or abusive relationships between mother and son. I had some, as I studied cinematography, I had some movies in my mind, or some movies came up to my mind. Maybe you know Mommy Dearest with gorgeous Faye Dunaway.
Yes.
She's a monstrous mother, really monstrous. There's a very beautiful movie made by Louis Malle. It's called The Murmur of the Heart. And this is a very happy relationship, sexual relationship between mother and son. Very disturbing because it's happy. And latest, there was a movie with a great actress, Julianne Moore. It's called Savage Grace, about a woman, about a mother between depression, artistic self-perception, and abusive love. And all this was the background. And I tried to get into this topic by reading stories on a platform where men wrote, anonymous platform, where men wrote their stories about their abusive relationships to the parents, to mothers and to fathers. And I found a story which got the example for my story. It was a story of a man who lived with his mother for 16 years, thinking also he was happy and the mother was happy, until he saw that the love of his mother is not only caring love, but sexual love in the age of 16. And then the paradox of childhood was lost. And this was a kind of example for my story.
You know, in Calcutta, there is a cliche about Bengali mothers being extra possessive about their sons. And there have been some weird stories recently, not necessarily sexual, but there have been several cases in the news recently where a son, who is an adult middle-aged man, is discovered living with a mother who has actually died, but the son has kept the body and keeps telling the neighbors that, oh, she's sick or whatever, so that's why you can't see her. And then eventually the smell or whatever rouses. But there have been several cases of people, sons who have been living with their dead mothers. And, you know, and they're kind of really horrific stories. But I wanted to ask you also whether the cliche of gay men and mothers having this weird, extra strong relationship, whether you think there's any truth to that.
I think yes. It was a kind of argument between an editor and me, because my psychological construction is son is abused by mother getting gay. That's cliche.
Yeah.
But it's not so sure, because Dion is a boy, and the story is about a boy, not about a man. And the story the man tells later is only the story of his novel. So maybe that he is gay is a construction of his novel and not my construction, and not the construction of the Moor. So it's not, it's more sophisticated, like this cliche abused son getting gay. But it was a kind of it was an argument of this editor, but I said, yes, why not? Fact is that many gay men have a not abusive, but close relationship to the mother, a very special relationship, that the sexuality of a gay man is not only focused on man, it's more, it's a kind of how you feel the world, how you touch the world, and the world touches you back, and you are getting touched in a different way by your father than your mother. So this is a total different way of physical love. And I don't have a problem with this construction. Maybe the others have, but well, I thought, okay, I don't care. Why not? The reader who finds a cliche in this construction, maybe his own relationship to his mother is a cliche. So it depends always. Your reading impression depends on your own background. How you read something is how you lived. Yeah.
And I remember people who would say, and this is in the Indian context, where anyway Bengali mothers are supposed to be very possessive of their sons, and they would say that in a way they were, a gay son's boyfriend was less of a threat to the mother than a prospective daughter-in-law. The mother always felt replaced by a daughter-in-law in a way they didn't necessarily feel replaced by the boyfriend.
Mothers are always happy about gay sons. That's a fact.
But which is, you had told me that you were right now involved in curating a couple of queer writing projects. And I was interested in asking you, what is the queer writing scene like in Germany right now?
It's in the moment, it's quite vivid and it's growing. And finally, it's not only gay anymore, it's also lesbian and transgender, and it was dominated in the 90s and also in the first part of the new century by gay literature, means by gay man literature. Now other forms of identity are telling their stories, but it's still not in the middle of society and not in the middle of perception of a literature in Germany. There are some publishing houses with a focus on queer literature, but I think that's a sign that we are still, as gay writers or as queer writers, at the periphery of society. We don't need queer publishing houses to publish. We need publishing houses, but not special queer publishing houses. But that's a very interesting topic that keeps me busy in the moment because, as you said, I'm creating a series of queer readings and a queer chapter in a literary magazine. And in both, we try to explore the question, what is queer writing? What is queer literature? Fact is, in our times, queer tends to be a kind of labeling. And that bothers me because I suspect any kind of labeling. Labeling comes from outside. Labeling is a queer publishing house, is a labeling, but it's a publishing house which publishes literature in the first time, at first, and then maybe it's queer literature. Labeling classifies you as a person with certain attributes, like being queer. And today, queer writing is expected to be also political writing. Queerness is not only a gender identity or a way to live your sexual relationships, it's also a kind of political message. And
is that limiting for a writer?
Yes, it is. For me, any kind of expectations on my writing are limiting me, put me under pressure to fulfill the expectations. I think queer literature is automatically political because it mostly comes from people who are not part of the mainstream society. That means I don't have to write political queer messages, or I even don't have to use queer characters to be political. I told you I grew up in a little town, provincial and Catholic. I had to hide my homosexuality for a long time. I was carrying masks, and but those masks taught me in a way to learn different languages. As a man in disguise, I saw things which others didn't see or couldn't see because they were not forced to look at them. So this different kind of perspective formed my writing. And I think to look at things in a different way, to look at things through a kind of broken mirror, the broken mirror of your childhood or the broken mirror of relationships of your family, is more queer in my books than the homosexuality of my protagonists. And I think if we focus on this aspect of queer writing, of the aspect of speech, of language, of perspective, not only gay characters or queer love affairs, we have a very wide spectrum of queer writing. So queer writing can be every form of writing which comes from the periphery, from people who are not part of the common sense of the common of the mainstream.
That's interesting because in a way, in this time when we have same-sex marriage is much more common, in a New York Times obituary, a man dies and it refers to he's survived by his husband and nobody thinks that's anything out of the ordinary. That kind of gay love story has sort of entered the mainstream, as it were. And
but
so
it's so old-fashioned.
Yes,
so
but in a way it feels like from what you're saying is that queerness needs to be itself liberated from those old expectations where at a time when, a boy-boy love story was so taboo that you needed a gay book to talk about it. Now it's not taboo. So queerness needs to find expression in other ways, because there's still lots of things that are taboo to talk about.
In German TV, there are gay characters in this main series, etc. But they are always like, I was gay in the 90s. They are really queer, and they are so gay, and they are cliche. That's not me. That's not my way of life. I want to see how those people live, and they have normal conflicts, normal family conflicts, they have a daily life, and it's not the topic that they are queer. It's just an attribute. But I still miss those normal queer people in the daily stories of TV. They are just the gays. They are outstanding. It's a gay series. Then there are only gays, but that also
only gay friends, and
gays,
and maybe and of course the two women friends that they must have. There'll be one overweight woman friend and one. But when you wrote your first book, which you described to me as a coming out and coming of age kind of story, were you nervous at all that, I am now going to be characterized as the gay writer, and then all these expectations will come on top of you?
I can remember a discussion between my publisher and me and the editor, where we talked about if we should label the protagonist on the book, on this
on the back cover,
gay. Is it a gay story? Actually, I don't know anymore how we decided. I think it's not mentioned. It's a love story between two men, but the word gay, I think we avoided the word gay. Yes, I was under pressure. I was excited, and from that moment on, the moment I published my first novel, I am a gay writer. And I'm very lucky now to have a publishing house, which it's a big publishing house, and they have gays and not gays authors and international authors, and that's not, I'm not labeled by the publishing house. But yes, in a way, I am labeled because my debut, my first novel was gay. The second, more, it's not gay. There's a boy, and maybe he's gay or not. My third novel, which is called Benzin, fuel in English, it's very gay, but it's in a way gay that the gay community, I had the expression they didn't like it because it's not friendly. it's not a friendly gay book. The gays are really mean persons in this book.
And which I think is the true liberation in the end.
Yes.
In the end, liberation is all about that you now feel liberated enough to portray gays as mean people, nasty people, instead of always feeling like I have to champion the gay cause.
I think the liberation is that society allows you as a gay person to be nasty, to be a nasty person, or to be like everybody. Yeah.
To go back to Moor, though, I wanted to ask you, about your own fascination in writing about childhood, because to use this cliche, we often say, a book about childhood is also a story about the loss of innocence or something like that, right? But while I'm reading the book more, I am not sure how innocent anyone is in the book, including Dion, who seems very innocent when we start with, but as it progresses, I am not sure whether the word innocent can, you used an interesting word. You used the word downfall, which I think is a more apt description than the phrase loss of innocence, which we typically use for books around childhood.
Well, I think it's not the loss of innocence which characterizes our childhoods. It's the loss of life. The childhood is a period of 10 years or 15 years, which you actually today you can't remember. It's a lack. It's a black hole, and you remember smells. You remember some pictures. I was very happy to read the first sentences of your novel, of the excerpt you sent me, because it's full of smells. It's full of pictures. It's full of this typical childhood sensuality. Yeah. But fact is, childhood is a lack of 10, maybe more years, which we can't remember. And fact is that because of this, we can't say who we are and where we come from. And childhood is not innocent. All the sins you are doing today are rooted in the childhood. So the childhood is the beginning of the downfall of your whole life. So it is in the retrospective we make out of childhood a paradise, but in fact it's just the beginning of our life. My interest in childhood is more a aesthetic interest, because my writing often deals with memories, but not with the memories itself as a biographical material, but with the impossibility of an entire memory of my writing is placed in this gap between what was real and what is created, what is mind-shaped, what is fiction, and our childhood is fiction. So the story of a coming of age is always the story of a life. And yes, my first novel, Mensch Engel, looks into the childhood of the protagonist. And I thought I had exhausted my childhood with that novel. It's done, but it's not. It was the beginning. So it was following Moor followed, and then my third novel, there's a little chapter about childhood. But this gap between loss and creation, this is how you deal with the childhood, and this is, for me, it's a kind of a literary principle, childhood.
Do you think there can be creation without loss?
No, you have to lose something to refine it. Yes, there can be, but there is no life. I think there is no life without loss. So creation is always a result of how you live, and how you live is always combined to a kind of loss. So you lose your parents, you lose a job, you lose love, you lose home. Yeah. So
yeah, because in a way, life, you keep accumulating more and more loss as you go through life, and each of these losses leaves some kind of impact on you.
But I think every loss is a kind of gain. So you lose and you gain a new experience, and the new experience makes me as a writer create new characters. Yeah.
Which in a way is interesting because we started off by talking about the pandemic, and now as our hour is almost up, I mean, the pandemic for us has been a year of literally counting loss. I mean, that is the biggest thing. I mean, loss on a scale that we in our generation had not exactly known. And perhaps, you know, we were talking about the great pandemic novel. Maybe, I don't know if there will be a great pandemic novel, but that loss that we have all experienced will surely, I think, find its way into some kind of creativity going forward. What do you think?
I think yes, and I think it's a natural process. And well, if you look back to the losses of the generation of our generation in the 80s and 90s, which died because of HIV, so many losses, and this was I think it was the kind of a pandemic in a small group. Now the same, not the same pandemic, but the same system of losses is affecting the whole world. So I know people who died in this time, and for example, I spent a lot of time in Zimbabwe for research for my third novel. Our generation, there is our generation, the people between 30 and 40 doesn't exist anymore. They are dead. They died because of AIDS. There are young people and there are old people, but the middle generation is nearly dead. This is a kind of traumatic experience of society which has an impact of art. Yeah. So I think now in the pandemic, nearly every family lost somebody or knows a family who lost somebody, but we didn't only lose lives or the lives of beloved people, we lost trust to trust in our good future, in our living standard. Our living standard is not sure. We thought it's sure, but it's not sure. And this is a big loss, a big social loss. We lost. We are frightened. At the moment, we are frightened, and this will have an impact on art in general, I think. And I think it's good. It's good that we have the possibility to change our mindset. But because I think it's time to change our mindsets. So the pandemic, this is a cliche, but the pandemic can be a chance to create, because loss and creation are combined.
And we're going to have to end on that note. So let me thank Gunther Geltinger for spending this hour with us before I hand it over to Astrid Wege to say the goodbye. Thank you so much, Gunther.
Thank you so much, Sandip. Thank you, Goethe-Institut, for inviting me. Thank you, Navin Kishore, the publisher of Seagull Books, for publishing the book we were talking about today. Thank you, everyone, for listening. It was a pleasure. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much, Gunther Geltinger and Sandip Roy. This was a highly interesting, very intense, and very insightful conversation with a lot of reflections on the impact of the pandemic on society and literature, on family relationships, especially sons and mothers, on labeling, I like this part a lot, and also on loss and the need to change. So thank you so much. It was really a very interesting journey you you took us all with you. And this was the first event in 2022 of our series, How Can You Hear What I'm Saying? You Are So Far Away. And I would like to thank again Gunther Geltinger and Sandip Roy, but also Seagull Books, Naveen Kishore and Bishan Samadar, and of course my colleagues. Don't miss to visit our website and to listen to the readings of the book by Gunther Geltinger, Moor, which had been discussed here, both by Gunther Geltinger himself and also by Yoshi. And also, please don't miss the next event on the 18th of February on 6:30 p.m. Indian Standard Time. And our next guest will be Ulrike Almund-Sandig and again, Sandip Roy. So thank you so much for joining us. Have a nice evening and see you soon again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.